In this video, we've got three separate tropical systems to talk about, plus some really intense heat and severe storms. So let's highlight the details going forward. Take a look at the satellite picture this morning, and you can actually see this blob of convection that moved across the Lesser Antilles. That is actually Tropical Storm Brett. Then we had another area that formed behind that one that has now become Tropical Storm Cindy. And then we also have another area of convection down here in the Eastern Pacific that's also looks to become another tropical entity. At the same time, we've got a low pressure up here towards Ohio, and then we have on the southern branch of that, very heavy rain that's going to be training across portions of Florida into the Carolinas, while the middle of the country, we're getting these convective mesoscale systems that are traversing across from the northwest to the southeast. And we're going to be seeing that's the severe weather setup going forward over the next couple of days. But let's highlight the details on these tropical systems. First and foremost, this is Tropical Storm Brett. It is currently a 60-mile-per-hour tropical storm going westward about 18 miles an hour. You do see once it enters the Western Caribbean, it actually runs into a lot of shear, and it actually is expected to weaken, if not completely dissipate, between now and the next 60 hours. So that really shouldn't have any impact to land. And then let's move on to Cindy. So we also have a formidable storm Cindy. In fact, very rare this time of year coming off the coast of Africa. In fact, this is the earliest ever that we had Brett and Cindy, two tropical systems that formed east of the Lesser Antilles in the month of June. It's never happened before, guys. It's just all that crazy warm waters out there in the Atlantic. We're able to just spin up these tropical systems, but fortunately, they're really not going to be affecting land because this one's actually going to be lifting northwest over the coming days. And this is also really not expected to become a hurricane as it lifts further northwest. In fact, it also is expected to dissipate as well by the time we get into the middle of next week. And taking a look at the overall in the Pacific, we do, yes, have an 80% probability of a tropical system forming down there. Now, the reason why I'm actually bringing this up is because this is actually going to be influencing the weather in a good part of Texas. The upper level low that's going to be forming off this system, the outflow of this counterclockwise swirl will actually help enhance the intense ridge that we're really expecting to build over a good part of Texas next week. And that is going to be lifting northbound and really encompassing multiple states with really just intense heat, especially moving into the middle of next week. So let's break down the details for today, because right now that ridge of high pressure is actually shifted a little bit further off into portions of Mexico, and you can see where the dangerous heat indices and the extreme heat warnings are mainly further off south and the southern side of Texas. That is able to have this northwest flow, and that's why we're having these storm probabilities that form basically off the Rockies and dive off the northwest flow, creates severe storms across the Texas panhandle. And there's going to be seeing several complexes that are going to moving across from northwest to southeast over the next 24 hours. That's going to bring some severe storms. So for right now, this is the way it looks, because yesterday on the storm reports, we had some intense hail form into portions of Colorado, back into New Mexico, that dove across into the Texas panhandle. And out here in West Texas, they had some anywhere from golf ball to up to tennis ball size hail in those areas. And a lot of the same areas are actually going to get hit today with that consistent northwest flow. As long as that ridge is further to the south, that allows these opportunities to kind of move in. We also have some, light to moderate rain showers forming across portions of Florida. That's complemented this low pressure center up here in portions of Ohio. So for today, this is the storm probabilities from the Storm Prediction Center. We are expecting two separate systems. First, the northern branch. That's going to be the most intense. We're looking at very large hail within this probability. coming out of Wyoming here, but especially entering the Dakotas, going into a good part of Nebraska with some very large hail probability, some golf ball to up to tennis ball size hail. Then we've got the southern branch on the northwest flow. Storms originate with the mesoscale convective complex tonight, later afternoon into the early evening hours into the Texas Panhandle, and those are going to be diving east southeastward and likely going to be impacting southern portions of Oklahoma as well as in portions of North Texas, with some high winds and some small to some large hail in those areas into the overnight time frame. So let's time this out over the next 24 hours. First, we have the northern branch of these storms that are really going to be blowing up into the heat of the afternoon. Heaviest rains on the northern side, and then the southern branch is going to get the severe storms with the very large hail. So pockets into Montana, back into Wyoming, going into the Dakotas, especially at portions of Nebraska. And then the southern branch will blow up storms across the Texas Panhandle and then dive east southeast across portions of the Red River into Wichita Falls regions, into portions of North Texas, diving southeast into East Texas. And then you have that low pressure center across portions of the Ohio Valley. And then the southern branch of that's the wraparound moisture feeding into Florida and along the East Coast here. So pockets of training convective thunderstorms could see some areas pick up 1 to 2 inches in a short amount of time, especially if you live closer to the coast. Definitely on the table for later on today. But yes, further south, it's all going to be about the heat, folks. I mean, there's that ridge of high pressure, all the excessive heat warnings and heat indices. Not really too crazy today, but it definitely gets dangerous as that ridge is going to be able to move back in and build and expand for much of next week. So here's the setup going forward. This is tomorrow into Saturday. We see the ridge really coming back into play. We're probably going to be seeing widespread heat indices, heat advisories, excessive heat warnings were across a good part of the south. And that puts the northern side of the jet stream more into play. So that's also going to put all the severe storms back into the plains regions. And that's the area that is going to be highlighted as the taps really shut off for a good part of Texas, and then eventually the southern plains. You're going to be very hard to squeeze out a drop in that atmosphere. So the storm threat shifts to the north into the central and especially the northern plains, and then that's where all the instability is going to be. So for Saturday, again, big time hail threat in these areas heading into southern portions of Minnesota, back into a good part of Iowa, Omaha, back into Des Moines region, and then reach down further south into portions of Missouri. Those are going to be some intense hail. That's the main event. Damaging winds, some isolated tornadoes, but really the main concern is the very intense large hail that is capable from these supercell thunderstorms. But again, further south, it's all going to be about the dangerous heat indices as that ridge will slowly start to build and really kind of take over a good part of Texas. That's why they're going to have excessive heat warnings across a good part of Texas, pretty much everything but the Texas Panhandle and far out west Texas. Everything else is in play. I mean, all those areas at 110, 120 degrees is definitely not out of the question. And that just expands, folks. That goes into portions of Oklahoma, goes into Arkansas, expands into Louisiana, and eventually shifts off into Mississippi and heading into western Tennessee. And then further to the north, you can definitely see where the cooler conditions are. That's where the instability is going to be, and it's going to be able to wring out some rain, and that's going to be the form of severe storms. So heading into your Sunday time frame, here's the setup for the large hail. It's going to be draped across southern portions of Indiana as well as Ohio, but especially into Kentucky. Kentucky gets hit hard with very large hail, back into portions of Tennessee as well, as this will slowly shift again from the northwest down east southeastward into the afternoon time frame. So on the 24-hour precipitation map, you can see where all the white is. That's where the ridge of high pressure will be dominating. A ton of sinking air, very next to impossible to rain in that type of atmosphere. So the northern side of that's where all the storms are going to be, where you've got those little colder pockets aloft in the upper atmosphere. that's going to be ringing out the severe storms as they start bubbling up in the heat of the afternoon. And most of them are going to be big time hell producer storms as they traverse and then eventually dive east southeast bound. But heading out into the Pacific, that's when things get interesting as we head into the middle of next week. We should have a formidable storm by then. It could actually become a hurricane out there in the east the Pacific. Not actually expected to, go and make land impact, but what I talked about, what it is going to be able to do, just the outflow in itself as this spins off to the west, the outflow from this storm will just expand the ridge, and it will help actually push the ridge further north. And that's just going to explode the heat, really intensify the heat. So I think in the beginning of the week, heading into the weekend, the main impact is going to be the dangerous heat indices as you're somewhat away from the ridge, but then as the ridge dominates and just expands and explodes and intensifies over Texas, I think the actual temperatures are really going to bump up in a big way. We could be looking at some serious heat, even some areas into the 110 plus range of actual temperatures, because there's the actual tropical type system going into your Wednesday, Thursday time frame with all that red just intensifying over the desert Southwest, over a good part of Texas. By then it'll be into Oklahoma, into Arkansas, into Louisiana, and even pushing further north. And you can see where the instability will be, right into the Dakotas, actually up almost in Canada, with the severe storms as this ridge continues to expand and build, and that's where the intense heat is. So the entire state of Texas will be under the gun with intense heat, with a lot of demand on the grid out there in Texas. 30 million people live there, folks. I mean, they got intense heat coming all week long. It's going to be brutal in these areas, and this just expands eventually into Oklahoma, into Arkansas, going into Louisiana, and eventually I think it gets into Kansas. It goes into Missouri, and just expands to a multi-state event. And of course, the desert Southwest will get impacted as well. But that just pushed the storm threat further off into the east. So really, you have instability across the eastern seaboard where you've seen a lot of rain lately. Now you're going to get hit with severe storms coming across into the Carolinas, back into the Charlotte region, getting into Raleigh, back into Greensboro, up into Richmond. These areas might get hit hard up into DC time frame, heading into your Monday time frame coming up for early parts of next week. But yeah, there's the rain prospects. Once we close out the end of the month, it's just going to be putting all the rain, again, further to the north, the storm track further to the north, across the northern plains and diving east southeast. It's really going to be setting up across a good part of the northeast. Not really severe storms, but really heavy rainfall. That's the placement. Is going to be probably the most higher impact event as we get in those last couple of days of June to close out the month up here in the Northeast. Some of these areas could be under flash flood watches, especially if you live along the coast here along the I-95 corridor. But there's the placement on the 500 millibar. You can definitely see what we're talking about, right? As the ridge will continue to build and build, you got these cold pockets aloft, and that's where the instability and the severe storms are going to be across the Dakotas. And then you've got some weakness across the Northeast. But there is going to be a little bit of a change. So this actual little system, this cold pocket aloft, are showing signs of indications. Once we get into that first couple of days of July, you might have a little bit of a reprieve again. So you're going to have this low pressure pushing further south. That's going to be pushing the ridge further away, putting more back into play as it moves westbound over the desert Southwest. Maybe in the first couple of days in July, over the July 4th weekend, you actually might get a little bit of a reprieve in the heat. But typically what all that means is you're going to put moisture back in the atmosphere. That bumps up the heat indices, that lowers the actual temperatures. So it's basically just going to feel the same with isolated possible severe storms by then. And then it's probably the ridge is likely going to come back after a couple of days. But there's the rain prospects, long ways out after you get today, the tap shut off for a good week, if not 10 days. And because of that other system, that little cold front that comes down from the north into the southern plains again, you might actually squeeze out precipitation, a little bit cooler conditions. Again, that just ramps up the humidity again and could have some isolated rain prospects around for your July 4th weekend. So guys, I appreciate you guys watching. Do like this video, definitely hit the subscribe button, and catch my next update where I protect you for and after the storm.